Hey Crossway, Kirk here. I just wanted to get on and give you guys a little bit of a preview or some reflection heading into this Sunday's sermon. Dan is going to be preaching Revelation chapter 1 verses 9 through 20 for us. I hope that you guys have enjoyed our series so far in the book of Revelation and have found it deeply encouraging. I know whenever I read a book and study a book of the Bible, all of a sudden that book becomes my favorite book, so I get that. But outside of that consideration, I really do feel like Revelation is becoming one of my favorite books. Just a book that I probably previously wouldn't have thought as one of my favorites. I'm really enjoying the book. I'm really finding it encouraging. Like we've said, I think oftentimes when we come to the book of Revelation, it can be a book where we have the impression or kind of the stereotype of it's very scary and intimidating, and not to play down some of the complexities. But I think when we properly understand the message of the book, we're not going to walk away being frightened by it, but by seeing the themes of God's sovereign coming kingdom, the authority of Christ, his control over the course of history, his victory over the course of history, and all those who oppose his rule. That's a really encouraging theme. So all the crazy, visions and stuff going on, the theme that overarches all of those is that God is over those things. Christ has control over these things. He's got victory over those things. And so it's a very encouraging book. So I want to read the passage for this Sunday for you, if you'll listen to it with me, and then just make some kind of reflections that you might think through leading up to Sunday. So Revelation, we did chapter 1 verses 1 through 8. This Sunday I preached that passage about Christ's coming kingdom. The revelation of Christ's coming kingdom, you could say, is really one of the major themes of this book, if not the overarching theme of the book. So heading into then verse 9, John talks about this initial vision that he has of the Lord Christ himself. So starting verse 9, I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, and to Pergamum, and to Thyatira, and to Sardis, and to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. And so John identifies himself with us as someone who participates in the patient endurance in Jesus, in the tribulation we go through during this part of history, and also he's a partner in the kingdom with us. And he's on the Lord's Day. He's on the day that Christians would have worshipped, and much of the book is a reflection of this battle of worships between worshiping the true God versus worshiping those idolatries empowered by Satan and his beast, etc., and the false prophet. Verse 12 then, having this vision on the Lord's Day, then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands stands one like a son of man. And later he'll eventually tell us that these lampstands throughout the book, you'll remember in chapter 11 we get 2 lampstands, these 2 witnesses. These lampstands throughout the book, the 7 lampstands here and then the 2 later, these are symbolic for the church. These represent the church. And he says, I saw these 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstand is one like a son of man. This language, son of man, coming from Daniel 7, this language that was one of Jesus' favorite descriptions of himself, of the one who would receive the kingdom from God, the Ancient of Days. And this was already alluded to in the passage that I preached this last Sunday, that passage from Daniel 7 of the Son of Man. And so in the midst of the churches is our Son of Man, Jesus Christ. And then we get this description of him. I won't go into all the details of this description. Dan will probably survey these, or we'll talk about these in the podcast. But he says he was clothed with a long robe with a white golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire, piercing eyes. His feet were like burnished bronze refined in a furnace. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and these are then said to be the angels of the churches. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword. His speech is like a sharp sword, and his face was like the sun shining in full strength. When I saw him, John says, he says, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand on me, saying, Fear not, I am the first and the last. He's identifying himself with the language that God himself used, God the Father himself used earlier, of the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the one who was, the one who is to come. And now Jesus here himself says, I am the first and the last. I am those things as well. I am the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore. I have the keys of death and Hades. I have authority over death. Write therefore the things that you have seen, those that are, and those that are to take place after this. As for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and the 7 golden lampstands, the 7 stars are the angels and of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. And so really what we get here in this vision, again, I'm not going to unpack all of this, but just to kind of get your mind going and thinking on these things. I'll pull up my computer here. Dan sent me his main point, and you might summarize it this way, as Dan has put it, that the almighty triumphant Christ is among his church in the tribulation. So John, at the very outset of the book, before he gets into the visions of the realities that we're going to go through, the beasts that we experience, the tribulation, even before we get to the message to the 7 churches, the messages to the 7 churches about the various aspects of the tribulation that they face, whether that's physical persecution or the temptation to wealth and materialism, or whether that's religious idolatry, you name it. What he wants us to do is make sure we have our eyes set, focused on Christ, that our eyes are locked on an accurate vision of Christ that is absolutely majestic and triumphant. So he focuses on who Jesus is, and he gives us a grand vision, one that where our vision of Jesus ought to be as big as the Jesus himself is. And that seems to be the assumption that John is working from then as he goes into the message of these messages to the 7 churches. Almost each of these messages to the 7 churches begins by referencing back to one of these descriptions that he just gave of Christ. So as to say, this description of Christ, having a true understanding of Jesus, a big view of Jesus, is very important as you go through and you seek to live out this call to patient endurance that he gives then to each of the 7 churches. So basically, you could boil it down to this, that as we enter the book, as we seek to live the Christian life, as we seek to patiently endure, practice this form of faithful, patient endurance that John describes as the Christian life, vital to that is having an accurate, i.e. a massive view of Christ. And you could flip it. That failure to live the Christian life faithfully in that way, you could diagnose as a result of having too small of a view of Christ. That's what John seems to be assuming. Let me get your eyes on Christ. Let me make sure you have an accurate view of Christ, because it's that very thing that is going to empower you to live faithfully in service to him. And so you might ask yourself this question as you think about this passage, as we head into this sermon. You say, how does a diminished view of Christ manifest itself in the people of God? How does it show up today? How does it show up in myself and our own church? What happens when we shrink Jesus in our thinking, viewing him as less than almighty, less than triumphant, less than ever present? Or positively, how does a glorious and accurate view of Christ man itself in the people of God? So be dwelling on that. Maybe take some time to read the passage for yourself leading into Sunday. I am very excited for Dan to exposit and to walk us through this passage together. I hope you are as well. Let's be praying for Dan, that God would use his word this coming Sunday to edify and equip us for the mission to which God has called us. See you then.